When I was a kid, I was about 3 years old at the time, on Christmas Eve, my mother was working for a mustachioed German farmer who was called Mr. Keel. And we were going to the church service down in Butternut, which is about 2 or 3 miles away, and we were going by sleigh. Now in those days, we rode in a sleigh which was like Hans Christian Andersen with all the curly-Q steel runners and so on, pulled by a couple of horses. So the three of us got into this sleigh. Mr. Keel, my mother, and I was sitting on her lap. We were driving along through the snow. There's slightly falling snowflakes, and all of a sudden our sleigh was struck from behind by a truck, and it slammed ahead into the horses' hind legs, and of course they immediately bolted and panicked, screaming, and took off down the road. And my mother didn't have hold tightly enough of me or something, and I went flying out of the sleigh through the air. And all of a sudden, I was no longer inside that little boy. I was standing out across the road, watching him fly through the air with this big, long, trailing red scarf. And he landed in a very soft, big snowbank, wasn't hurt in the slightest. And all of a sudden, I was back in him in church with people trying to warm my hands by rubbing them and so on. So I've often wondered, was that a real out-of-body experience, or is it just my 85, 86-year-old brain trying to make some sense out of something that happened, or to add a little glamour to something that happened? But then, when I was in the last stages of my marriage to my second wife, I had another heart attack. I was coming up on one. I didn't really have one. But I was coming up on one, so I stopped off at the hospital. And they put me in a bed, and they wired me up, and I'm laying there all, and I was watching the monitor, and they show a blip every heartbeat, and it's going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then 1, 2, 3, and then 1, 2, and all of a sudden I realized that doesn't look right. By that time, the bells were going off all over the floor. And the nurses and doctors came rushing in with all sorts of carts and instruments. They immediately tipped the bed down so my head was pointing down so the blood could flow into my head. And all of a sudden, I was up on the ceiling, looking down, watching this whole thing. And I was sort of amused by their attempts, Here are these people, they're so desperate to get this body back to life. What the hell does it make? He'll either live or he'll die, big deal. And I had this argument for a little while, and then all of a sudden, I heard the beeping get back to normal, and I was back in myself, looking up at the doctors. And that was, I think, a real out-of-body experience. Not being religious in the slightest, it was sort of unsettling because it proves to me that the mind is capable of leaving the body and existing somehow. I don't think that's a fact due to any God or anything else. It just is. And maybe someday in the future, you'll be able to keep people alive even though their bodies are gone. So who knows?